This is a story about how two gamers, Marco and Jonny, played Super Monkey Ball and saved the world. Or at least tried to save it. It's a tale of friendship, rivalry, and video games. But most importantly, it's about monkeys. And balls. Lots of balls. I met Marco on my first day in college. He was a year older than me and he was one of those people that everybody likes straight away because they're just so cool and funny. He had a shaved head with some sort of weird tattoo covering half his scalp, which looked like it hurt a lot. His face was covered in piercings, 3 holes in each ear, and 1 piercing through each eyebrow. I thought he looked great, but then again, I'd always been partial to the goth look. We were sitting next to each other during an introduction session for all the new students when he asked me if I wanted to play some video games together. We decided to meet up after classes and get ourselves some beers while we played whatever game came out on top of the pile. The first thing I noticed about him was that he never seemed to be wearing the same clothes twice in a row. Some days he wore black jeans and a tight black t-shirt, others he would wear baggy jeans and a long gray hoodie, and sometimes he'd go for something more casual. One day he even showed up in what can only be described as a bright blue tracksuit with white stripes down the side, which I found pretty amusing. It took us ages to find any games worth playing, but eventually we settled on a racing game called Need for Speed Shift 2 Unleashed, which turned out to be really good fun. The controls were easy to master and the graphics were brilliant, the cars looked almost real and the tracks felt realistic enough to drive along. When you crashed, your car got damaged and you could repair it by buying parts from shops or simply repairing it yourself. After a few hours of playing, we went back to Marco's house and ordered pizza, drank beer, smoked weed, and played Mario Kart 64 until our eyes started to blur. After a couple of days I finally got round to asking why he always wore different clothes and he told me that he didn't have many clothes left because he kept burning them in his pyromania tendencies. Marco liked to burn things. A lot of things. Books, furniture, CDs, DVDs, plastic bottles. You name it, he burned it. He said he loved the smell of smoke, and that burning things made him feel better inside, but I couldn't help thinking he was a bit strange. He also seemed to think he was really hot stuff because he'd managed to get his hands on some special cigarettes with marijuana leaves printed on the paper filter instead of tobacco. As far as I know, Marco still doesn't smoke tobacco, and he definitely isn't going to ever stop burning things. Jonny and I became best friends almost immediately. He was very much into football, and I remember watching him play matches on his Xbox 360 against the computer every Friday evening. He was actually pretty decent too, especially considering he was only 14 years old. I used to love seeing him score goals in the penalty shootouts. I'm not sure how he did it, but he always seemed to hit the net. I don't know how he does anything, honestly. He has the mind of a genius. One Sunday afternoon we went over to his house to hang out and play Call of Duty 4, which he had bought off eBay for £40. He knew I wasn't very good at online gaming and that I preferred to play offline, so he gave me a quick tutorial before we jumped into the action. We both got a kick out of playing with the zombies, but I soon realized I needed to start learning the basics before I could jump onto the multiplayer servers and try my hand at the regular game modes. I was doing okay though, and it didn't take me long to get used to the controls and weapons. Then I spotted a map called Blood Harvest, which was a small map that was perfect for beginners. I loaded it up and waited for Jonny to join me. When he arrived, I quickly explained the rules before we kicked off. Okay, I said, this is Blood Harvest. What? You've heard of it, haven't you? It's one of the maps for Call of Duty 4. No, I haven't. Well, let me show you. I walked towards the edge of the map and pointed in the direction of where I wanted Jonny to go. This is a big building here. There are 2 soldiers hiding behind it, and there's a sniper up there. Is this a zombie map? No. This is a regular game mode, but it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, so there will be lots of zombies running around. Zombies? That's weird. Yeah, but it'll be cool once you get used to it. Now follow me. I began walking away from the building, towards the edge of the map. Here's another building. It looks like it might contain a weapon cache. Let's check it out. But you said it was a regular game mode, right? Yes. But the map is small, so it should be easy to win, provided we stick together and keep our heads low. Alright then, lead on. We ran across the open ground, keeping an eye out for enemy players who might spot us and decide to kill us. I decided to head towards the first building, which was about 50 meters away. As we neared it, I saw 3 soldiers standing outside, guarding what looked like a door that led inside. They're waiting for us, Jonny whispered. Good thing I brought a gun. Don't worry, he replied, I've got something else planned. The 3 guards turned around and watched us approach. I stopped dead and pulled out my AKM assault rifle. The soldier closest to me fired a shot. I ducked down and fired back, killing all 3 men instantly. I stood up and ran through the doorway, leaving Jonny behind. Inside, I found myself in a dark room filled with crates. There were no enemies nearby, but I figured I would search the area anyway, just in case they had been lying in wait. I moved slowly through each crate, hoping to find a hidden stash of guns or ammo. I finally reached the end of the room when I came face to face with a guard wearing a gas mask. His eyes lit up when he recognized me, and he raised his pistol. I spun around and shot him in the head, dropping him to the floor without even needing to reload my AKM. I took a look around the corner to see if there were any more guards waiting for me, but I couldn't see anyone. Where's Jonny? I asked myself out loud. He must have gone left after coming through the door. I thought I'd better go left too, in case there was someone waiting to ambush me. I crept forward and peeked around the corner. Sure enough, there was Jonny crouching in the darkness, waiting for me. He smiled and waved, so I stepped out from cover and we exchanged high fives. Nice work, he said. Let's go. Right. As we made our way past the next few rooms, we started to hear gunfire from somewhere close by. We cautiously peered round the corner and saw 3 soldiers rushing towards us, firing their pistols into the air. I held my AKM steady and opened fire as soon as the trio drew closer. 2 of them fell to the ground immediately, while the third managed to crawl under a desk and hide. Jonny and I kept shooting until there was nothing left to shoot, then sprinted across the open space towards the next building. We continued along the path, moving silently and staying well clear of the windows, ready to duck behind cover again at any moment. Eventually, we reached a large open field containing some cars and a couple of trees. That's the car park, I whispered. Gotcha. Jonny nodded and pointed at one of the cars. Do you think that's a good place to hide? Depends how many people are chasing us. If there are only 2 guys, then maybe. How do we know how many guys there are? Look around for other people, then count the number of bodies. Okay. There weren't any other players visible, apart from a single soldier sitting in a nearby tree, watching us intently. Shall we sneak over there and see? I asked. Sure. We carefully crossed the open space and climbed onto the roof of a nearby car. From above, we could clearly see that the car park was full of people, most of whom appeared to be armed. Some of them were also hiding behind the buildings, so I assumed that they knew where we were and were simply waiting for us to make a mistake. A few minutes later, 4 players emerged from the shadows, heading straight for us. One of them was holding a shotgun, while the others carried rifles. This isn't going to be fun, I muttered to Jonny. Yeah. Not exactly what I had in mind either. We both dropped off the top of the car and ran towards the nearest building. As soon as we reached its entrance, I threw a grenade inside, blowing a hole in the wall and sending the enemy soldiers flying backwards. They landed on the ground and didn't get up, so I knew they hadn't been seriously hurt. That meant they still had some fight in them. I quickly checked the area around the entrance, making sure that there wasn't another group of soldiers hiding somewhere, before hurrying inside. I walked into the main corridor of the building, scanning the walls for weapons and ammunition. All I could find were boxes of bullets, which didn't really help me much. It was time to start looking elsewhere. You think this is the right place? Jonny asked. Probably. Let's check it out. We cautiously walked down the hallways and looked around every corner for signs of danger. After 10 minutes of careful searching, we discovered a door leading into a small office. It was locked, but not locked tight, so I kicked the handle and forced the door open. Inside, I found a couple of desks, an empty filing cabinet, and several chairs scattered about the room. The walls were covered with posters featuring smiling patients, who all seemed very happy with the treatment they'd received. There was no sign of the dentist or his assistant, so we moved further inside, checking each room thoroughly. By now, we'd become accustomed to using stealth tactics rather than brute force, so it took longer for us to find anything useful. Finally, however, we stumbled upon something. The room contained a small fridge and a set of shelves stocked with medicines, including painkillers, antibiotics, and various medical tools. It also had a sink and a toilet, which gave me hope that there might be some useful equipment here too. I opened the drawers of the first desk and found a bunch of syringes filled with various colored liquids. Looks like they've got some drugs in stock, Jonny remarked. Yeah. Now let's take a look at these syringes. I pulled one free from the drawer and held it up to the light. Its needle was thick and solid, which suggested that it was intended for injecting medication directly into the body. These would probably work better if you used a gun to inject them, I said. If you stabbed someone in the neck, for instance, it should have a more immediate effect. I guess so. How does that work, though? Does the drug go straight into their bloodstream, or do they need to drink it somehow? It depends on what kind of drug it is. Painkillers will enter your bloodstream instantly, whereas stuff like sedatives may need to be taken orally. What are you planning to use that syringe for anyway? Well, I don't want to waste it, but I'm guessing that I can use it to give myself a quick shot of painkiller. And why is that? Because I'm feeling pretty beat up after running through those zombies. You're not thinking of trying to escape, are you? Of course not. I just wanted to give my own wounds a bit of a boost. You saw how hard I hit that zombie last night when I punched him in the face. He must have given me some bruises. I suppose that makes sense. If you've got a bad cut or broken bone, you'll probably benefit from getting some pain-killing medicine injected into you. Exactly. As I examined the syringe, Jonny continued talking. So, what happens next? He asked. I don't know. What do you reckon? He thought about it for a moment, then replied. I think we should try to make our way back to the other side of town. We won't be able to hide out here forever, and I'm worried about being spotted by some soldiers or civilians. We're not even sure if any of them survived the attack yet. That sounds good to me. But where do we head for once we leave this place? There's a road leading west. It runs along the edge of the city and connects the eastern and western sides together. Maybe we should follow that until we reach a safe distance. Sounds good. Where should we meet again? We can decide on that later. For now, I suggest we split up and search for supplies while we have the chance. Just stay close enough that we can see each other. Okay. I'm going to check out that storage room over there. Jonny left the room without saying goodbye and headed towards the room I'd mentioned earlier. I walked to the doorway and peeked inside. Sure enough, it was full of boxes stacked neatly against the wall. As I started opening the containers, I realized that most of the contents were medical supplies, bandages, disinfectants, needles, and other such items. This wasn't quite what I was looking for, so I decided to move on to the next container instead. I pulled it open and found another stash of bandages, which I proceeded to unpack and examine. They weren't as high quality as the ones I'd seen in the hospital, but they would still help keep the wounds clean and stop infection from spreading. I moved on to the next box, and it turned out to contain more medical supplies. I picked up an assortment of syringes and took a closer look at them. Unlike the ones I'd been using before, these were much thinner and shorter, so I guessed they were meant for injection rather than taking blood samples. They all looked identical except for one, which appeared to be made of gold. The others seemed to be silver, so I figured that it probably contained a higher concentration of medicine. That explained why the others hadn't worked. After examining the remaining boxes, I returned to the first one. Inside, I found a few bottles containing different types of liquid, plus a selection of pills that could be crushed and mixed with water or food. These included paracetamol and ibuprofen, both of which were commonly available over the counter at pharmacies. I finished unpacking everything and placed the boxes in the corner of the room, where they wouldn't get in the way. Then, I opened the door to let Jonny know that I'd finished, and headed outside. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the streets below. As I stepped out of the building, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I turned around to find Jonny standing there. "Hey, Alex," he called. "Did you find anything useful?" "Yeah, I did," I replied. "I managed to scavenge quite a few things that might come in handy. Here." I reached down to the floor beside me and picked up 2 small boxes filled with medicine. One was filled with bandages and the other with painkillers. I handed one of the boxes to Jonny. "Thanks," he said, inspecting it closely. "This looks great. Do you mind if I take it? There's no way we could carry this much ourselves. No problem. Take whatever you want. We continued walking through the streets, heading westwards along the edge of the city. After a few minutes' walk, we came across a large supermarket on the outskirts of the city. A large crowd of people stood in front of the entrance, shouting and waving their arms. When we arrived, we saw that the doors had been smashed in and lay strewn across the ground, while several bodies littered the street outside. What happened here? Jonny asked. Some kind of riot broke out inside the store, I replied. I guess everyone was desperate to grab whatever food was left. From the looks of it, there isn't much left, though. Not enough to satisfy everybody anyway. Do you think anyone will survive? Probably not. Most of the people who are still alive are already eating scraps off the floor, or fighting for food amongst themselves. If someone doesn't act soon, the whole city is going to turn into a war zone. Is there any way to break through this mob? Not unless we kill everyone first. We'll need to wait until night falls before we can approach the store again. Hopefully then, the crowd won't be so big anymore. As we continued walking, we spotted a small park ahead. In the center, a man sat cross-legged in meditation, his eyes closed and his hands clasped together. He didn't appear to notice us, so we approached him quietly. I leaned in close to Jonny's ear so he could hear what I had to say. That's Dr. Leif's son, I whispered. He was one of the doctors in charge of the hospital before everything went wrong. He survived somehow, despite being surrounded by infected patients. Apparently, he was able to treat himself too. So, he knows how to cure the virus. Jonny asked. It seems like it. But we don't have time to ask him now. Let's head back to the hotel and try to figure something out. Okay, sounds good. We slowly walked past Dr. Leif's son without disturbing him. Once we reached the sidewalk, we headed straight for the hotel. On our way there, we passed by another group of survivors, and a brief scuffle erupted between them. At the same time, we noticed that a large number of infected had gathered at the entrance to the hotel. Jonny and I stopped walking, but neither of us knew what to do. Neither side appeared willing to give in. Finally, a man in a blue shirt ran forward and raised his hand to calm the crowd down. He started speaking loudly and clearly, but nobody paid attention. Instead, they shouted louder, demanding answers from the man. The situation quickly escalated into chaos as several more men joined the argument, trying to shout down the man in the blue shirt. Eventually, the blue shirt man lost control and began pushing his opponents away. Several men fell to the ground and others fled in terror. Within seconds, the entire area was completely engulfed in violence. The blue shirt man looked around desperately, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a voice rang out above the din. Stop! Everybody froze. Slowly, the crowd parted, allowing a man wearing a white lab coat to enter the fray. He took a step forward, looking around carefully to make sure nobody was nearby. When he finally spoke, his words were soft and measured, yet loud enough for all to hear. Please, stop fighting each other. You're all sick, just like me. You've got the same goal, survival. Together, we can achieve that. We need to work together to make it happen. The man stepped forward and placed his hands on both sides of the blue shirt man's face. As he did, the man's expression changed from fear and confusion to shock and disbelief. His mouth opened wide, and his eyes bulged out of his skull. Then, in an instant, the man collapsed to the ground, dead. The crowd watched silently as the man in the lab coat removed the dead body with one quick motion. With a nod to himself, he turned around and disappeared into the crowd. All hell broke loose once more, and within minutes, the scene was completely chaotic once again. Jonny and I stood there in silence, watching the mayhem unfold around us. Eventually, we decided to return to the hotel where we could plan our next move. We entered the lobby and found ourselves surrounded by hundreds of zombies, most of whom seemed oblivious to our presence. There was no point hiding in the lobby, it would only draw unwanted attention. We needed somewhere else to go, and fast. There must be an underground passage under this building, Jonny said. Where? And how do we get there? I know where it is. I saw it when I came to visit the hospital. It should lead right underneath the hotel itself. Then let's find it, I replied. Follow me. Jonny led me towards a staircase leading up to the second floor. After climbing 2 flights, we emerged onto a balcony overlooking the main lobby below. A few people still lingered there, apparently unable to resist the temptation of food. They were easy prey, so we made our way downstairs. Soon afterwards, we found ourselves standing in front of a door marked staff only. This leads down into the basement, Jonny explained. Let's see if we can find some stairs leading down into the sewers or tunnels below. Okay. Jonny pushed open the door and held it for me to pass through first. The room beyond was dark and dank, illuminated only by dim emergency lights mounted high on the walls. A single fluorescent light flickered on and off sporadically, making the whole place seem even darker than normal. Ahead of us, a small corridor extended further ahead, disappearing into the gloom. We moved cautiously forward until we reached a set of doors blocking the path. One of them was slightly ajar, giving us a glimpse of the interior. We heard voices inside, but couldn't tell who they belonged to. "You'll never get in here," a male voice yelled angrily. "Not while I'm alive anyway." "It doesn't matter whether you're alive or not," another man responded. "They'll kill anyone who tries to stop them. Now shut the fuck up before someone sees you talking." "Who are you?" Jonny asked. "That doesn't concern you," the man replied. "If I help you escape, will you promise to keep your mouth shut about my involvement?" "What makes you think I want to escape?" "Because if you don't, you won't have anywhere to hide anymore," I said. "And why should I care?" "Because you're going to die unless somebody helps you. That's the reality of life in these parts now. Either accept that fact and prepare yourself, or stay and rot. It's entirely up to you." "Well, I'd rather take my chances than give myself over to those monsters," the man replied. "Good choice." We waited in silence for several moments before hearing footsteps approaching behind the doors. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a pair of men standing guard outside. Their faces were pale and drawn, their bodies covered in scratches and cuts. One had a nasty gash across his forehead which looked like it might require stitches. The other was missing half of his left ear. "Who goes there?" one of the guards asked suspiciously. "It's okay," I reassured him. "My name is Alex. My friend here saved your lives back at the hospital. I told him to come down here and rescue you." If he hadn't been here, you'd already be dead. The guard peered at Jonny carefully, then nodded and relaxed somewhat. He gestured for us to enter. Once we were all inside, he closed the door behind us. "Thank God you got here in time," he said. "How many of you are there?" I asked. "Just the three of us." But it wasn't just us that survived. Others escaped too. People started leaving the hospital long before the attack happened. They knew something bad was coming. "Did anybody survive?" I asked. "No, nobody did." "Not really." "Why not?" "We tried to protect as many as possible, but the creatures tore most of them apart." "What sort of creatures?" "Monsters, demons, whatever you want to call them. They were part human, part animal. Some of them were tall enough to reach the third floor. Others were little more than animals themselves. I saw one of them tear a nurse's arm clean off. Another one ripped a doctor's throat out with its bare hands." "Was there any sign of survivors?" I asked. "Only one. Dr. White, the head of the medical staff. He hid himself away somewhere deep within the bowels of the hospital, but the creatures tracked him down eventually. He fought valiantly, but in the end they killed him." "Do you know where he went?" "Yes, he took a secret route into the sewer system. I've been trying to find him ever since I arrived here last week. I thought he might still be alive after everything that happened. Sadly, I was wrong. Can you lead us to the sewer entrance? We need to go and look for Dr. White." "I can try," the guard replied. "But I can't guarantee anything." "All right. Follow me then." We followed the guard along a series of corridors, turning down side passages and crossing bridges. After what seemed an age, we came to a large metal hatch which led down into a tunnel. A narrow ladder ran along the wall beneath the hatch, leading downwards. There didn't appear to be any way to open it from above. "There's no point climbing down yet," the guard said. "You'll only make things worse when they catch us." "Will they catch us?" I asked. "Of course. This is the city's main water supply. Nobody goes anywhere near it without permission. So how do you get in and out?" "Through the sewers underneath the hospital. You must remember that some of our patients suffered from mental health issues. They would sometimes wander off on their own. I always suspected that one day they'd return to the sewers. Wouldn't the people who live in the city notice that the sewer tunnels were getting blocked up by tons of rubble every night? They might, but that wouldn't necessarily mean anything to them. Most of the residents are far too preoccupied with surviving each day to worry about such mundane matters." "You said that you'd been looking for Dr. White for a week. How many days has it been since the attack began?" "5, the guard replied. "Have you seen any sign of him recently?" "Not yet." "That doesn't sound promising. Maybe we should forget about finding him and head straight to the sewers." "Are you sure you want to do that?" the guard asked. "If we do find him, will you be able to help him? You don't seem very strong or skilled. What makes you think that you could even hope to defeat these beasts?" Jonny looked around nervously, but neither myself nor Marco had much choice in the matter. The guard's question made sense, especially given what we'd been through so far. It would have been nice if we'd found somebody who was capable of fighting the creatures, but we couldn't afford to waste time. "Well, I suppose it won't hurt to give it a shot," Jonny admitted. but we're going to need backup if we're going to stand a chance against those monsters. If anyone else wants to come with us, now's your chance. Nobody else wants to join you?" Marco asked. "It's just as well. I doubt anyone would be brave enough to risk it. Who knows? Perhaps they are hiding back there somewhere, waiting until it's safe to emerge again." The guard shrugged. "I'm not willing to take that kind of risk. I have my orders. That's why I've been searching for Dr. White all week. Now let's hurry before the creatures realize we're here and start chasing us." We climbed down the ladder and followed the guard down into the dark, dank depths below. I was relieved to see that the tunnel continued ahead in both directions. It wasn't long before the walls closed in, forcing us to squeeze together to make room. "This way," the guard whispered. "Just keep walking until you reach the next junction. Then turn left." After another few minutes we reached a junction. As instructed, we turned left. We passed several more junctions over the following hour, but none of them looked familiar. Eventually we came to another dead end. "This isn't right," I muttered. "Why does this section look different from the others?" "Don't ask questions. Just follow me." The guard led us further down the tunnel, heading towards a small opening in the ground at its far end. He knelt down and pressed his ear against the floor, listening intently. "What's he doing?" I whispered to Marco. "He's checking if anybody else is coming," he answered. A moment later, the guard stood up. "There's nothing to be concerned about," he said. "Now move quickly before they notice us." We hurried past the guard and made our way across the gap in the ground. When we got closer to the hole, I realized that it was actually a window set into the side of a building. It was covered with bars like a jail cell, although the window itself was barely big enough for a human to fit through. There were two doors set either side of the opening, one leading inside and the other leading outside. A couple of steps led up to an open-fronted balcony. "That's where we'll go," I told Marco. "Once we get inside, we can climb out onto the balcony and then jump to the roof." Marco nodded. "Okay," he said. "Let's go." As soon as we stepped through the door, we heard a loud voice shout in German. We froze in shock, wondering whether the guards had finally noticed us. But no sooner did we hear the voices than the sound disappeared altogether. After a while, we risked turning our heads. To our surprise, the guard was gone. "Where did he go?" I whispered to Marco. "I don't know," he replied. "Perhaps he went to alert the authorities. Or perhaps he slipped away to warn someone inside. Either way, it looks like we're alone." I took a deep breath. This was probably our last opportunity to escape, but I still didn't feel ready to leave without saying goodbye. "Good luck, Jonny," I whispered. "And thanks for everything. You never gave up on me when I thought nobody else cared about me anymore." "Thank you." "No problem," he replied. "It's been great working with you." With that, Jonny headed off towards the prison cells. I watched him walk away sadly before hurrying after him. I wanted to say something, to try to stop him, but I knew that it wouldn't do any good. At least this way he could save himself. When I reached the nearest cell, I saw Jonny standing by the barred window, looking out at the courtyard. His expression was grim as he stared into the distance, but it wasn't hard to guess what he was thinking about. "Are you okay?" I asked. Yes, but it doesn't change anything. I'm sorry, Alex, but I can't stay. You mean you're leaving? Of course I am. If I don't run now, I won't get a chance to ever escape again. Jonny turned round to face me. His eyes glimmered with determination. You mustn't give up hope yet. I'm sure there will be another way out of here. How are we supposed to find it? The place is huge. Jonny smiled sadly. If only there was somebody who could help us. Like a magician or something. Exactly. That would solve all our problems. I bet he could even tell us how to escape from prison. But what if he asks us to do something really dangerous? Like let him take us somewhere that we shouldn't go? Well, I suppose we'd have to risk it if that's the price of freedom. I'd rather die trying to escape than spend the rest of my life locked up. Then the zombies attacked. They burst through the door, their arms outstretched, hungry for flesh. And just like that, everything changed. Run! I screamed. Jonny sprinted across the room and leaped through the window. Then I followed him, leaping through the bars and landing on the ground below. My legs ached from the fall, but at least I hadn't broken anything. Before long, Jonny landed beside me and helped me up. What do we do next? I asked. Should we go back inside? Not yet. Let's keep going. Maybe we'll find some sort of exit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had Jonny really given up on escaping? I looked around desperately, hoping that maybe I was wrong. Perhaps I was overreacting. But even so, I found myself unable to trust him. He might look different, but the man who had once saved my life was still the same person underneath. So why should I believe his promises now? Come on, Jonny urged. We need to hurry. If we don't act fast, they'll catch us. I swallowed nervously. It seemed like Jonny was serious after all. He was willing to sacrifice himself to ensure my safety. Even though I didn't want to admit it, he made a very persuasive argument. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe him. How could he betray me like this? Wasn't he the one who had always supported me? Who had stood by my side through thick and thin? Okay, I mumbled reluctantly. Let's keep going. As soon as Jonny heard the words, he grabbed my hand and started running down the corridor. We kept running until we came to another set of doors. Jonny opened them without hesitation. Inside, there was a row of dentist chairs. I glanced around quickly, searching for an exit. There weren't any windows anywhere near. I guessed that the dentist chair was the only way out. Wait, I said. Before we go in there, we should make sure no one's watching. Otherwise we may end up being caught. That makes sense. Jonny nodded, then disappeared into the darkness. When he returned, he carried a small flashlight in his right hand. This should be enough light to see where we're going. He shone the beam on the floor, revealing several large footprints. Whoever had created those marks had been wearing white shoes. After seeing Jonny's own footwear, I assumed they belonged to one of the doctors. Follow me, Jonny instructed. Keep your hands close to your chest and don't make a sound. No matter what happens, don't turn round. Keep walking straight ahead. The footsteps led us deeper and deeper into the building. Soon, we were surrounded by tall concrete walls. At last, We stopped outside another set of doors. A few seconds later, they swung open, revealing a long corridor with numerous rooms on either side. Each room was filled with rows upon rows of shelves containing boxes, bottles, jars, vials, and other strange objects. Some contained liquids, others gases, while some held pills and capsules. "There has to be a way out," I whispered. "Some kind of hidden door or secret passage. Wherever we are, I'm certain we can find our way out eventually." "No doubt about it," Jonny agreed. A short distance away, I spotted two guards standing by the entrance. They both wore black uniforms with white collars. One of them appeared to be holding a clipboard. I recognized the logo on his jacket. It was the same as the one I'd seen on Dr. Saperstein's coat earlier. "They're not looking at us," I observed. "So far, we haven't attracted any attention." "That's good news, isn't it?" Jonny replied. "Yes, but..." My voice trailed off as I noticed the doctor who had spoken to me earlier. She was sitting behind a desk, her eyes fixed firmly on me. Her gaze sent a chill down my spine. She was staring at me intently, as if she could read my mind. "She's following us," I gasped. Jonny turned around slowly, scanning the area carefully before nodding. We had no choice. Either we took action immediately, or the doctor would capture us. "Do you have any weapons on you?" I asked. "None. But I think we can handle this situation." "How?" "We've already got a weapon of sorts," Jonny replied. "All we need is a little courage." With that, he lifted the flashlight high above his head. The bright beam illuminated the entire corridor. As soon as the light hit the guard's face, he jumped to his feet. His eyes bulged from their sockets and he let out a scream. For a moment, I thought he was having a seizure. Then, with a loud thud, he collapsed to the ground. "What did you do to him?" I spun around and saw the second guard rushing towards us. Before I could react, Jonny struck him across the back of the neck. The man dropped to the ground, unconscious before he hit the floor. "Quick thinking," I exclaimed. "It wasn't easy," Jonny admitted. "But I managed to subdue him without killing him." "Good job. Let's hurry." Without saying a word, I followed Jonny into one of the rooms. There was a long table in front of us, along with 3 chairs. I sat down first, followed closely by Jonny. "Who is that woman?" I asked. "Her name is Dr. Saperstein," Jonny explained. "She works here as a research scientist. According to Dr. Saperstein, she specializes in developing new drugs." "And that means..." Jonny paused for a moment, studying my expression carefully before speaking again. "According to Dr. Saperstein, this facility is dedicated to the creation of pharmaceuticals and other similar products." "You mean these drugs aren't meant for human consumption?" "Of course they're not," Jonny answered. "Not all medicines are designed specifically for humans. Sometimes, they're used to treat animals." "Why are you telling me this? Why not keep it a secret?" "Because I trust you." I stared at him for a moment, wondering how I should respond. Eventually, I said, "Thanks." Jonny smiled warmly. "Now, I want you to listen carefully," he continued. "Dr. Saperstein knows about our mission. If she sees us, she'll alert security. We must get out of here before anyone else discovers us. Okay, I responded. What next? We're going to pretend nothing happened. Pretend we never saw Dr. Saperstein. And then we will make our way through the building until we reach the exit. Sounds like a plan. Jonny nodded. Let's start with the room directly opposite us. I believe there's an emergency exit there. Then let's go. As we stood up, Jonny reached over to the table and picked up the small glass bottle. He held it up to the light so I could see the label clearly. This is nitroglycerin, he told me. Oh yeah? What does it do? When mixed with water, it becomes a liquid explosive. In other words, it makes a powerful fire bomb. Cool. Jonny laughed softly. Don't worry, he assured me. The explosion won't hurt anyone inside the building. Even though it will blow out the windows and doors, there won't be any serious damage. It will only cause some minor structural damage. I studied his face carefully. He looked just like a kid showing off his latest toy. It sounds perfect, I replied. Just what we need to escape. That's right, Jonny agreed. Since it's nitro, we don't even need matches. All we need to do is drop it onto the floor. The explosion will burn everything to ashes. Including us. I'm ready, I declared. The big showdown was surely about to begin, I thought to myself. Are you sure? Jonny asked. We still have time to abort the mission. No. Why not? Because I love you. What? You know I can't hear you, right? I don't care. This is important to me. I understand, Jonny replied, sighing sadly. I guess I should have expected this. What do you mean? I knew that eventually the two of us would run into each other. It's inevitable. After all, we both work for the same organization. It's only natural that we'd cross paths sooner or later. So why are you acting this way? Please forgive me, Jonny said. But I already promised Dr. Saperstein that I wouldn't tell you anything. She warned me that if I did, I could lose my position. And she didn't exactly give me much choice. It was her or me, you see. I don't get it. Why does she care so much? Look, the situation is complicated. But I really don't think it's necessary to explain it to you right now. Just please trust me. Okay. Okay. And before you ask, I won't betray you. That I promise. I know you won't. So, what do you say? Jonny asked. Will you come with me? Yes. Great. I've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Me too, I replied. As we walked along, I couldn't help but notice Jonny's stride had become more relaxed, almost as if he'd finally found peace. I felt the same way myself. Our journey had been far from easy. Yet somehow, we managed to persevere. Now we were on the home stretch. How long do we have to wait? I asked. 5 minutes, Jonny replied. Then he added, I'm sorry, but I don't have any cigarettes left. I got rid of them a while back because I was worried someone might discover them. It's okay, I told him. I don't smoke anyway. I can't believe you don't smoke, Jonny replied. You spend half your time trying to get me to quit. I'm not trying to get you to stop smoking, I explained. It's just that I'm really bad at it. Really? Yeah. I've tried several times. I'm just hopeless when it comes to quitting. Well, I hope you succeed one day. But I guess it's pointless talking about it right now. We have more pressing matters to attend to. Let's keep moving. We continued our journey through the underground complex, passing by countless rooms. As we made our way deeper into the facility, I noticed that each and every room had its own unique set of features. Some of them were decorated, others were barren. Some of them had windows, while others were completely dark. Most of the doors appeared to have been locked tight. I wonder what they're all used for, I mused aloud. It's probably some kind of storage area, Jonny replied. In fact, I bet most of these rooms aren't even in use anymore. They're probably just here to confuse people. But how can you be sure? They look like they haven't been used for years, Jonny reasoned. Remember, this place has been abandoned for over 20 years. What else could you expect? True, I conceded. Still, I wish I knew what was behind those doors. Hey, don't worry, Jonny said. That question will probably never be answered. In fact, I don't even want to know. Why not? To be honest, I'm quite happy the way things are. I wouldn't want to know the truth. It would ruin everything. Why? That's simple, Jonny replied. Do you remember what happened last year? Do you recall the incident with the vampires? I do. The reason Dr. Saperstein wanted you to infiltrate the vampire nest wasn't because she needed you to kill them. It was because she wanted you to find out what they were up to. In particular, she wanted to know if they were planning to attack the organization. Like I said, I remembered. I'm glad you do, Jonny said. Because I'm going to tell you the truth. You see, there was an experiment conducted 20 years ago. A secret experiment, to be exact. What kind of experiment? I asked. An experiment that involved creating a perfect human being. An experimental subject who was free from greed, jealousy, envy, and any other negative emotion. The goal was to create something so powerful that no one would ever be able to control it. And by no one, I mean anyone. Including the organization. That doesn't sound good, I remarked. I agree, Jonny replied. Unfortunately, the experiment failed. But that wasn't the worst part. Things got even worse after that. See, the experimental subjects turned violent. They began attacking everyone around them and killing innocent bystanders. They also started eating humans and drinking their blood. No way, I said. Are you serious? Deadly serious, Jonny answered. Dr. Saperstein immediately recognized the threat these creatures posed, and so did the organization. That's when they decided to dispose of them. But unfortunately, they didn't get rid of them completely. Instead, they sealed them away deep within this underground complex. And what exactly is this place? Jonny paused before replying. He stared off into space for a moment, as though lost in thought. Then he finally answered. This facility was built to house the experiments that were performed on the experimental subjects. It was designed to protect them from the outside world. Unfortunately, that won't help us much now that I think about it. Why not? Because the experiment failed, Jonny replied. there's a good chance that the experimental subjects are still alive. What do you mean? How could that be? Who knows? Jonny shrugged. Maybe they escaped. Escaped? I wouldn't put it past them, Jonny said. After all, they were designed to be extremely intelligent. Intelligent enough to figure out how to open locks and escape cages. And since they were injected with human blood, they must have developed a taste for it. Either that or they were able to find an abundance of human flesh in this place. That would certainly explain why they attacked me, I muttered. I'm afraid it's a lot worse than that, Jonny told me. You see, Dr. Saperstein found out about the existence of these creatures only recently. After searching the archives, she discovered the location of the facility. She then sent me in here to investigate. There was no time to send anyone else in after me, since she feared that the creatures might destroy anything and anyone that was too close to them. So what was your mission? My mission was to search this whole complex and find out where the creatures were being kept. If possible, I was also ordered to try and kill them. I had no idea that these beings were capable of such violence. Even after seeing what they did to you, I still can't believe it. It just goes to show how ruthless they really are, I added. Yes, Jonny agreed. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd never believe it. But the more I think about it, the more I begin to understand. They were created to be incredibly dangerous. Perhaps they weren't meant to survive at all. But why didn't the organization just destroy them? I asked. They tried, Jonny replied. But the creatures somehow managed to escape. And to make matters worse, the organization doesn't have any proof that the creatures exist. So they're forced to deny their existence. No matter what happens, they will never admit the truth. How horrible, I whispered. It gets even worse, Jonny continued. The organization has been hiding the truth from the public for over 2 decades. Now, we don't know what the creatures are capable of, but it's safe to say that they've probably done some pretty nasty things. Maybe they killed people while they were in captivity. Or maybe they massacred a bunch of innocent civilians. We may never know. But it's clear that the organization doesn't want the general populace to learn the truth. That's true, I replied. Then again, it's possible they already knew about the creatures, and that's why they built this facility in the first place. But even if that's the case, I doubt that they ever intended for the experiment to succeed. The organization never planned on having to deal with the consequences. I see, I said. But why did you come here? Jonny asked. To rescue my friend, I said. He's trapped down there somewhere. Well, I hope you find him soon, Jonny replied. Me too, I answered. As far as I'm concerned, he's family. We spent the next few hours walking through the corridors of the underground complex. It wasn't easy, because every room looked identical. Every corridor was the same. There was nothing distinguishing one area from another. And yet, I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. Every minute felt like an hour. I wondered if it was really worth it. Why was I wasting my time looking for someone who clearly didn't want to be found? I tried to keep a positive attitude, but it was hard. When would I ever see Jason again? What if something happened to him while I was gone? Would I ever get to see him again? I didn't want to think about it. My heart couldn't take it. I needed to focus, otherwise I'd go crazy. Jonny took his job very seriously. He didn't stop for breaks, and he always seemed to know exactly where he was going. I admired his dedication. I wished I had half of his motivation. Suddenly, Jonny stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment, I thought he'd discovered something important. But when I looked around, I realized that he was staring into space. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "Can you tell me what you saw?" "No," Jonny said. "Not now." "Okay," I said. "Let's keep moving," Jonny suggested. A few minutes later, we entered another room. This one looked different from the rest. Instead of being filled with equipment, it was covered in thick dust. All of the tools were lying on the floor. It appeared as though the room had been abandoned for years. "This must have been the lab where they performed the experiments," Jonny explained. "I suppose so," I muttered. "Look," Jonny said. There were dozens of skeletons laid out on the ground. Most of them were naked, and they had been left there to decompose. There was something wrong with every single skeleton, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. We kept on walking anyway. This was the source of all evil in the world, and we couldn't just walk away. Like babies. We were big strong men. We could handle anything. The corpses were scattered throughout the room. Some were near the door, while others were right beside the wall. As we walked past each body, we got a clear look at their faces. They were all young. Most of them were only teenagers. But none of them looked happy. Their expressions were filled with fear. A few of the bodies had bullet holes in their heads. They'd been shot by the monsters before they died. "Someone's been killing these poor kids," Jonny whispered. "Who would do such a thing?" "Maybe the organization did it," I said. "I doubt it," Jonny replied. "They wouldn't kill children like that." "Why not?" I asked. "Because it's not in their nature," Jonny explained. "Their entire reason for existing is to protect humanity. If they wanted to kill anyone, it would be the monsters. But that's not what happened here. These kids were taken captive, and then they were murdered. That means that someone else killed them. Do you think those people are still alive?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," Jonny said. "Whoever killed these kids will die too." "How can you be so sure?" I asked. "Because I'm going to kill them myself," Jonny replied. "And when I do, I'll make sure that no one comes after us." "Not anymore." "Okay," I said. "You know, you're lucky I came along," Jonny said. "If this had happened without me, you might never have seen your friend again." "I understand," I said. "Good," Jonny said. "Because we've reached our destination." We followed Jonny into the last room of the underground complex. It was dark inside. The only light came from torches hanging on the walls. Jonny shone his flashlight onto the floor. As soon as he did, I recognized the symbol painted there, a circle with a line through it. I knew I'd seen it somewhere before. "This is the room where they tortured the little boy," Jonny said. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Of course I'm sure," Jonny replied. "Why don't you show me the way?" I suggested. "All right," Jonny agreed. "But first let me say something." "Yeah." I said. There's a good chance that this is the last time I'll ever see you, Jonny said. You mean you're leaving? Yes. Where are you going? I'm going to kill whoever did this, Jonny said. That's all I need to know. Okay, I replied. Jonny led me to the center of the room. There were 3 wooden chairs arranged in a triangle. 2 of them were covered in blood. Whoever had sat in those chairs had died horribly. I don't get it, I said. Why would anyone torture a kid? Those monsters aren't exactly human. I don't know, Jonny said. Maybe they're sick. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter, I said. As long as we find them and kill them. We began searching the room for clues. There was a desk against one wall. On top of it was a large map. Its contents were written in Chinese characters. I had never seen the symbols before, but I could tell that the words meant something important. What does it say? I asked. I don't speak Chinese, Jonny replied. I can read English and Japanese though. Doesn't matter, I said. Just point to the symbols and I'll try to figure out what they say. Fine, Jonny said. He pointed to the symbols on the map. These are the names of the monsters who used to live in this area. How do you know that? I asked. Because I know everything, Jonny replied. Now point to the ones that you want translated. Okay, I said. Let's start with the biggest monster, the one called the giant bear. Okay, Jonny replied. The big bear has 6 legs and a tail. And he's about 15 meters tall. What do the next 2 symbols mean? I asked. They're the names of the other monsters, Jonny replied. One is the iron tiger, which is another giant bear. The other is a snake-like creature called the green dragon. It's about 20 meters long and weighs 8 tons. That's the same thing as the giant bear, I said. Is there anything more? Yes, Jonny replied. Look at the 3rd symbol. I can't read that, I said. Can you? Sure, Jonny replied. It means the Dragon King, the leader of the monsters. He's the strongest of all of them. No kidding, I replied. What's the last symbol? That's the symbol for a bunch of small creatures, Jonny replied. They call themselves the little monkeys. Little monkeys. I repeated. They sound like real jerks. Don't worry, Jonny replied. I won't let them hurt you. But they can be annoying sometimes. Aren't you afraid of them? I asked. Not really, Jonny replied. I think they're all stupid. So you just leave them alone? I asked. Yeah, Jonny replied. Why? I asked. It's because I'm so smart, Jonny replied. Oh, I replied. Did you find anything else? Jonny asked. Yeah, I said. I held up my hand. I found a little piece of paper. Show me, Jonny said. I showed him the piece of paper, then handed it to him. Here it is, Jonny said. Read it. Okay, I said. It says, I've been here since December 21st, 1987. I haven't seen any humans yet. So it looks like he came from someplace far away. Like maybe China or something. And that means? Jonny asked. That means that someone kidnapped him and brought him here, I replied. But why would they do that? I don't know, Jonny replied. Let's keep looking. Do you have any idea where this guy went? I asked. No, Jonny replied. If I did, I'd take him back home. You're pretty smart, huh? I replied. I guess, Jonny replied. At least I know how to find things. That's the most important skill you can learn. What about fighting? I asked. Fighting isn't important, Jonny replied. It's just a way to get yourself killed. Are you sure? I asked. I thought you were supposed to be really good at fighting. I am, Jonny replied. But that doesn't mean that I want to fight. I see, I replied. Well, I hope you're right. Because we need to find this guy before anybody gets hurt. Jonny shrugged. I don't know, he said. He's probably dead by now anyway. He might not even be human anymore. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe he's still alive and living somewhere around here. It doesn't matter, Jonny replied. Let's go kill these vampire monsters. What if they're too strong for us? I asked. We could die. Then you'll have to go back home, Jonny replied. I already told you that. I've never gone back home, I replied. I'm not going to start now. It's your life, Jonny replied. But I don't understand why you're so stubborn. You know that you're only here because I rescued you. That's true, I replied. But I don't care. But you should, Jonny replied. Because I love you. You don't know what you're talking about, I replied. You don't even know who I am. I think I know you better than anyone ever has, Jonny replied. How can you say that? I replied. I've hardly known you for 10 minutes. But I feel like I've known you for years, Jonny said. Before we had time to talk about our feelings, a strange noise banged from above us. Then suddenly there it was. I still have nightmares about this moment. It felt as if the entire world was coming down on top of us. I looked up, and saw a huge chunk of stone falling through the air towards me. When it landed, it crushed me to the ground. As I lay there helplessly, I heard Jonny screaming my name. Jonny! I cried out. But he didn't hear me. He was too busy trying to save himself. The next thing I knew, a giant rock fell on top of him. Jonny! Jonny! I yelled again. But nobody heard me. I couldn't move. My back was pinned under a big boulder. I tried pushing against it with my hands and feet. But nothing moved. I couldn't breathe, either. I tried to yell, but no sound came out. I started to panic. I was scared of dying. I was more afraid of being buried alive. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. I tried to call to them, but I had forgotten how. Jonny! I cried. A shadow appeared in front of me. Its face was covered with dirt and blood. Help me! I screamed. Please help me. The figure turned its head toward me. I saw that it was a man. He reached out his hand and pulled a knife. Don't scream, the man said. You'll only make it worse for yourself. He then pressed the point of the knife into my chest. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I started to cry instead. The pain was terrible. I couldn't stop it from hurting. Stop, the man said. It's going to be all over soon. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see anything else anymore. Soon I would die. I knew it. There was no doubt about that. Then I heard another voice. It sounded familiar. I opened my eyes to see who it was. The stranger had disappeared. In his place stood Jonny. His chest was covered with blood. But he was smiling. I knew that smile. I loved that smile. Jonny! I cried. Jonny smiled. I'm sorry, he said. I couldn't hold on any longer. No, I replied. You saved me. I almost lost my life saving you, Jonny replied. Stop, I cried. You've done enough. Now get out of here. I can't leave you behind, Jonny replied. Not when you need me most. No, I replied. I don't. Yes, Jonny replied. You do. You're just too weak to see it. Please, I said. Just go away. I won't, Jonny replied. And I'm not leaving until you promise to come with me. Fine, I replied. Let's go home. Where is that? Jonny asked. Back to your house, I replied. To where you're safe. I wish I were, Jonny said. But I can't go back there. I'd rather die with you than live without you. You can't die, I replied. Not while I'm still breathing. I know that, Jonny replied. But I have to try. Why? I cried. What's so important about your life? Why can't you give it up for mine? Because it's the right thing to do, Jonny said. That's why. The right thing. I cried. You call this the right thing? I don't know, Jonny replied. Maybe it isn't. Well, it sure as hell isn't, I cried. You don't have to die for this. So what if I do? Jonny asked. I'll be able to save lots of people. People like me. And you. I looked at Jonny. The pain in his eyes was killing me. If I hadn't known that he was talking nonsense, I would have believed him. Don't do it, I pleaded. Please don't do it. It's already too late, Jonny replied. I'm ready. No, you aren't, I said. This isn't happening. This is a dream. I'm sorry, Jonny said. But it is. No, I replied. It's not. Yes, Jonny said. It is. And I have to do this. So you might as well get used to the idea. Get used to what? I cried. Getting used to the idea of losing me, Jonny replied. I tried to tell Jonny that it wasn't true. But he already left. He never looked back. Jonny knew what he had to do. But I was a coward. I couldn't let him go. I couldn't stand the thought of seeing him in so much pain. I ran after him. I chased him through the forest. I didn't care where he went. I just wanted him to stay with me. I wanted to keep him alive. But I couldn't catch him. I couldn't find him anywhere. I came to a clearing. There, standing in the middle of it, was Jonny. He was holding a wooden cross. His hands were bloody. I could see the holes where the knives were buried. But he didn't seem to notice. He kept walking forward. Jonny! I cried. I told you once before, Jonny replied. I'm sorry. But I can't change my mind. You promised, I cried. I did, Jonny replied. And I meant it. But I made a mistake. I shouldn't have trusted you. I'm sorry, I cried. It doesn't matter, Jonny replied. I'm going to die anyway. No, you're not, I said. Yes, I am, Jonny replied. I'm sorry. But I'm just too weak to fight anymore. I can't make it any longer. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Please don't say that, I cried. Don't ever apologize to me. I'm sorry, Jonny replied. But I can't help it. I'm sorry. Please don't cry, Jonny whispered. I hate seeing you cry. I'm not crying, I replied. I'm not strong enough to stop. I can't hold back anymore. Then please don't leave me, Jonny replied. Stay with me. I can't, I replied. I can't stay here. I'd rather die with you. Goodbye, Jonny said. It was the last word to leave his mouth. He turned around and walked away. Wait. I cried. Where are you going? I'm going to heaven, Jonny replied. I love you, but I have to do this. No, you don't, I cried. You can't go to heaven. You haven't done anything wrong. It doesn't matter, Jonny replied. I've been sentenced to death anyway. I'm just following God's plan. And that was a story about how two gamers, Marco and Jonny, played Super Monkey Ball and saved the world. Or at least tried to save it.